Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today I'll be taking you through the Writing and Language section of SAT Practice Test 2. I'll be giving you my tips, tricks, and advice for this section, and I'll also be teaching you grammar rules that you will need to be able to follow when taking this section on the SAT. Now we can go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through each passage, and as we approach questions, I'm going to show you how I would approach them, what to look for, and then ultimately how to solve them using grammar rules and also just using logical reasoning. So we'll go ahead and start with our first section. Librarians help navigate in the digital age. In recent years, public libraries in the United States have experienced reducing in their operating funds due to cuts imposed at the federal, state, and local government levels. Well, as I read through here, as soon as I got to have experienced and saw a word in the middle of our sentence that's underlined, one word, I know that I'm looking for a change in the word or an option of changing the word, right? So A, no change, could be my answer, but ultimately I'm just checking to make sure that this word fits grammatically in the sentence and also makes logical sense, right? So as I read, I hear, in recent years, public libraries in the United States have experienced reductions. And as I read, I want to automatically fill in that next word before I even see it, right? So I want to think, what would I say if I were writing this? Well, I know I have experienced here, which is a verb. So I can't have reducing here, which is a verb. So now I look at my answer choices. Well, I already see I would fill in reductions, right? Just as I read, that's what makes sense. But if I didn't fill that in, let's say I said deductions, right? Because I was thinking, okay, it can't be a verb, so how about deductions? Well, I'd see that I have deducting and deducts. But what are the problem with each of these? Well, deducts is a verb. We can't have a verb and then a verb after it. And then we have deducting, which is also a verb. So I know that those two are out. And I know no change is also out because reducing is a verb, right? So I know I'd be left with B. All right. Now I see a word underlined, one word at the beginning of a sentence with a comma after it, right? So I see like however right here. Well, now I know I'm looking at transition words. So I'm looking at if there needs to be a transition word here. Well, in order to solve for the transition word, I need to know what my sentence before it is saying and what my sentence that follows it is saying. Because then I can determine what kind of transition we're using, whether it's contrasting or additionally or some sort of similarity or a causal word showing causation. So I know in my previous sentence we talked about reductions in government funds for libraries, right? Cuts on government funds for libraries. Well, our next sentence states library staffing has been cut by almost 4% since 2008, and the demand for librarians continues to decrease even though half of public libraries report that they have an insufficient number of staff to meet their patrons' needs. All right, so we know that these libraries want to hire more, but that they can't, and they're having to cut people because they have budget cuts, right? So that's going to come as a result of these budget cuts, the library staffing is down. So we need a causal word, such as consequently, right? Previously doesn't work because that's not a causal word. However doesn't work because that's a contrasting word, not a causal word, and nevertheless is also not a causal word. So I know my answer here is going to be B. All right. Employment in all job sectors in the United States is projected to grow by 14% over the next decade, yet the expected growth rate for librarians is predicted to be only 7%, or half of the overall rate. This trend, combined with the increasing accessibility of information via the internet, has led some to claim that librarianship is in decline as a profession. All right, well, what do we have here? We have one word underlined in the middle of the sentence, and then there's a comma here, so we want to pay attention to if we need a certain word here, like a fanboy, in order to connect these as two independent clauses with a comma, but here it doesn't look like we have that situation, right? So we have this trend, and then we have a comma combined with the increasing accessibility of information via the internet, comma, so we know that this is going to be a non-essential phrase, so I'll just put any for non-essential. So now we can read, this trend has led some to claim that librarianship is in decline as a profession. Well, that sounds grammatically correct, and it is grammatically correct, right? And we can see if we were to try D, we would have this trend which has led, no. This trend which have led, no, and then this trend which have led. And none of those are right because we're talking about this trend has led some to claim, right? So people claiming, it has led, those match in tense, we're all set. So our answer will be A there. All right, so now we move on. We have, as public libraries adapt to rapid technological advances in information distribution, librarians' roles are actually expanding. The share of library materials that is in non-print formats, and then we have our box here, so that's going to be At this point, the writer is considering adding the following information. And then we have our dash, and then ebooks, audio and video materials, online journals, which we know are all examples of our non-print formats. And we're asked, should the writer make this addition here? Alright, well let's go ahead and determine what we think with a yes or no answer before we look at our answer choices. We don't want to get distracted or tripped up by wording, right? Alright, so we have the share of library materials that is in non-print formats is increasing steadily. In 2010, at least 18.5 million ebooks were available for them to circulate, and that'll get changed, but it'll likely be similar. Alright, so now we're looking at this. We have the share of library materials that is in non-print formats, and then we list the non-print formats, right, which we haven't done, so it's not like it would be repetitive. Now, what about redundant? Will it be redundant? Well, we have 18.5 million ebooks here, but we're also saying audio and video materials and online journals, so I wouldn't necessarily say that's redundant. So now I'm going to look at my answer choices. I'm going to go ahead and say, should the writer make this addition here? I would say yes, because it provides examples, right? Which would be A. Yes, because it provides specific examples of the materials discussed in the sentence. And then if we looked at B, yes, because it illustrates the reason for the increase mentioned later in the sentence. Well, no, not really. It doesn't explain the reason for it, and that's really all we need to know. And honestly, if you come up with your own answer, it's usually best to go with your own answer because it's going to be unbiased as to what any type of question or answer choice would lead you to, right? You don't want to get led away from what your initial perspective is because it's likely right. And that's not to say that you can never change your mind on an answer choice, but I mean, if you go through it and you take the time to really make sure that you have it right, a lot of times what you come up with will be the answer, right? And then you have no and no, which we already determined weren't going to be our answers, right? And we can read through C and it will say, by supplying irrelevant information, but it is relevant because it's discussing the non-print formats, and the other part D would be because it weakens the focus of the passage by discussing a subject other than librarians, and that doesn't apply either because it's not weakening the focus by talking about what librarians are now using. So, alright. So we have, is increasing steadily. In 2010, at least 18.5 million ebooks were available for them to circulate. Alright, well, what do we know? We're given that in 2010, at least 18.5 million ebooks were available for them to circulate. Well, for them is just librarians, right? Librarians, I'm not going to write that out. You guys can just listen to what I said. But if we were to think about this, right, this is kind of a long way to say that these ebooks are just getting circulated, right? So if we were to read this, and we got to here, right, where I'm doing this little parentheses, if we were to read to it and we were to get right here, what would we think would come next? Because a lot of times what we think would come next naturally is going to be our answer. So let's go ahead and read through. At least 18.5 million ebooks were available for them to circulate or for circulation. We don't need them to circulate, right? That's unnecessary and that's redundant because we already know we're talking about librarians, right? And we want to avoid redundancy. So now if we go down and look at our answer choices, we determined A is out because for them to circulate. Well, them to circulate, we already know we're talking about librarians, so that's kind of redundant. Now we have for their circulating, which doesn't work grammatically. And then we have to be circulated by them, which is just very long, right? We want to be efficient with our word choice. So then we have for circulation. Well, let's just make sure that it's grammatically correct. At least 18.5 million ebooks were available for circulation. Yup, it's to the point, it's efficient in our word choice. It has great diction. We're not using unnecessary words like for them to circulate. We're just doing for circulation. So that's going to be our answer. Simple and to the point. As a result, librarians must now be proficient curators of electronic information, compiling, cataloging, and updating these collections. Well, when you see a list like this, with a list of verbs, right? So we have compiling and updating. So these are two verbs, and we also have catalog, which is actually going to be a verb because it's going to be cataloging. And without even looking at the answer choices, you can see I haven't even gotten to 6 to look at the answer choices. I know that's going to be my answer, and here's why. When I have a list like this where I do compiling, cataloging, and updating, our endings have to match, right? So our ing in compiling, our ing in updating, and our ing in cataloging all have to match. So I know my answer is going to be cataloging. So my answer will be D. Alright, but perhaps even more importantly, librarians function as first responders for their community's computer needs. Since One of the fastest growing library services is public access computer use. There is great demand for computer instruction. Okay, now we see we have which choice most effectively combines the underlined sentences. So we're just going to look to, as we approach our period and at the end of our first sentence, we're going to look to see what kind of thing we can use to connect that to our second sentence as we read it, right? So we have, in fact, librarians training now includes courses on research and internet search methods, many of whom teach classes in internet navigation, database and software use, and digital information literacy. All right, so what I'm going to look for when I look at my answer choices is I'm actually going to start with my shortest answer choice first, right? Because we're wanting to be efficient by combining these sentences. So I'm going to start with the answer choice that has the least length, right? I'm not going to go through and count the words, but just the one that visibly looks like it's the shortest, right? And I'm going to start with that one and see if that one works first. So off the bat, I see that B and C look to be about the same. So I'll go ahead and start with B. All right. In fact, many librarians whose training now includes courses on research and internet search methods teach classes in internet navigation, database and software use, and digital information literacy. Well, I'm actually going to go ahead and pick this, and here's why. It's grammatically correct. We have in fact followed by a comma, right, because that's our introductory clause or statement there. And then we have, it's not a clause, but we have in fact, right, as our introductory statement. And then we have many librarians. And then we have our non-essential phrase, whose training now includes courses on research and internet navigation methods, teach classes in internet navigation, database and software use, and digital information literacy. Well, that hits all the points we touched on in our two sentences here. It's grammatically correct because we have our non-essential phrase from whose training now includes courses on research and internet search methods, right? So now we're left with, in fact, many librarians teach classes in internet navigation, database, and software use and digital information literacy. So we know that that's grammatically correct. It hits all our major points. It connects to the two sentences, so we're going to pick B, and we don't even have to look at the other ones. All right. Well, these classes are particularly helpful to young students developing basic research skills. And then we have but. Well, here's what I see here. When I see but here, followed by or preceded by a comma, I know I'm looking at the fanboys, right? We're probably looking at an independent clause here and an independent clause here to form our compound sentence. So I want to be careful when I pick what word I'm going to replace this with. And I know I'm probably replacing this word because it's one word underlined middle of the sentence, right? So I want to make sure I don't pick a word that isn't a fanboy or fanboys, because then it could mess up our grammar, right? So let's go ahead and see what our choices are. And I also want to pay attention to the relationship, right? So we have, while these classes are particularly helpful to young students developing basic research skills, well, while these classes are particularly helpful, that kind of sets us up for a contrast word, right? Well, they're helpful to these people, but maybe not to these people. So but could be our answer, but we're going to go and see what our other options are, right? Well, looking at this, I read this, I see, while these classes are particularly helpful to young students developing basic research skills. Well, that's actually not an independent clause. So while when I see this comma and but, I would anticipate it being one, it's actually not, right? So when I see well, I know well is a subordinate conjunction, which means that up to here is actually a dependent clause. With a dependent clause starting a sentence, I know I need to have a comma after the dependent clause, but I know I do not need to have a fanboy after the dependent clause, right? So we don't need a fanboy. So we don't have to have but. We actually don't have to have any fanboy. We don't have to have and, we don't have to have for, and we don't have to have but. We actually just need to have our independent clause follow it, right? So our independent clause here, by removing but, would be, well, adult patrons can also benefit from librarian assistance in that they can acquire job-relevant computer skills. And that's going to be our answer, right? Because by getting rid of that, we make our sentence grammatically correct because we have our subordinate conjunction well, which creates our dependent clause up to our comma here. And then we have our independent clause all the way to our period, which means that we have a complex sentence, right? So our answer here is going to be D. All right. And now we've got free to all who utilize their services. That sounds lengthy. without looking at my answer choices, I can tell you that kind of sounds lengthy. So I'm just going to go ahead and note that as I go through. Free to all who utilize their services. Public libraries and librarians are especially valuable because they offer free resources that may be difficult to find elsewhere, such as help with online job searches, as well as resume and job material development. Alright, let's see what our choices are. We're asked which choice most effectively sets up the examples given at the end of the sentence. Alright, well, what are our examples? Let's see. So we've got they're offering free resources that are difficult to find elsewhere. They're giving help with online job searches, resume, and job material development. Alright, so free to all who utilize their services, that's not really setting up our examples, is it? So let's go ahead and look for something that's better setting it up. Well, our examples, they all talk about applying for jobs, building your resume, all things to do with employment, right? Well, when will employment be crucial as we look through our answer choices? Well, employment's going to be crucial during periods of economic recession, right? And if we look at C, we have, although their value cannot be measured, but that has nothing to do with our employment examples at the end. And then we have, when it comes to the free services libraries provide, well, that's not really the gist of, or not the gist, that's a bad word choice on my part. That's not the point we're making. The point we're making is employment here. They're very helpful to help get people employed through online job applications and resume building, right? And that's important during periods of economic recession. So our answer is going to be B. All right. An overwhelming number of public libraries also report that they provide help with electronic government resources related to income taxes, law troubles, and retirement programs. All right, I see my list here. My list starts with income taxes, that's one. Then I have law troubles. Well, what does law troubles sound like? It just sounds off when related to income taxes and retirement programs, right? These are organized well, right? Law troubles, that's not sophisticated like income taxes or retirement programs, right? Law troubles is like something that you'd say if you were like pretty much misspeaking, to be honest, or if you were just writing a quick text, right? But this isn't a quick text, right? This is supposed to be a solid piece of writing. Income taxes, maybe legal issues would be better, which actually is going to be our answer here, B. Concerns related to law courts, what's that? That's just too long, it's too lengthy. We want to be efficient with our word choice, right? The three things that I want to make sure you guys get from these videos is that we want to avoid repetition. We don't want to unnecessarily repeat phrases or words. We want to avoid redundancy. And we want to be efficient with our word choice. Those are the three big keys, in my opinion, to the SAT writing section. So those are three things I want you guys to really focus on when you're taking these. And then we have matters for law courts. Once again, that's not being efficient with our word choice. And law troubles is just too informal for this, right? So it's going to be legal issues B. In sum, the internet does not replace the need for librarians, and librarians are hardly obsolete. Alright, now we're asked which choice most clearly ends the passage with a restatement of the writer's primary claim. Well, what's his primary claim before we even look at these answer choices, right? Well, his primary claim is that librarians, they are important. That's really going to be our main claim. So we're just going to go ahead and look at our answer choices with that in mind, right? That they're important, they provide crucial services to the community, and that's his main point. So let's go ahead and see what our answer here says. Our answer here says, like books, librarians have been around for a long time, but the internet is extremely useful for many types of research that doesn't touch on our main claim at all. So we can get rid of A. How about B? Although their roles have diminished significantly, librarians will continue to be employed by public libraries for the foreseeable future. Well, saying that their roles diminish significantly, that's contrary to what we've just read. We've just read that their roles have expanded into internet research. All right, and then C. The growth of electronic information has led to a diversification of librarian skills and resources, yes. Positioning them as savvy resource specialists for patrons, yes. Right, that touches on the importance of librarians. And then D, however, given their extensive training and skills, librarians who have been displaced by budget cuts have many other possible avenues of employment. We never talked about that, so D is out. All right, tiny exhibit, big exhibit. All right, and then when I see this one here, what that means is that there's going to be a question more than likely, there's going to be a question asking about what paragraph should go where. So there's going to be a paragraph that's either misplaced or it's correctly placed, and we're going to have to identify that it's correctly placed. But that's telling me that, right? All right, so now we can go ahead and get started. And it's really your call when you see this one here. If you want to go find that question that's asking about the paragraph and where it has to go, you'd find that, and you'd go read that paragraph. And I would probably recommend that, just because otherwise you could get confused when you get to that paragraph because it's in the wrong spot and it could kind of cause some trouble for you. So we're actually going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to find the question that's asking about our paragraph, and it'll likely be at the end after all the paragraphs. So let's see if we can find it. All right, question 22 asks about the previous passage as a whole. All right, so we're asked to make the passage most logical, so we want it to follow a timeline more than likely. Paragraph 2 should be placed where? And we're given where it is now, 3, 4, or 5, right? So we know our paragraph 1's in the right place, and where our options are 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're just going to keep that in mind. Or I'm sorry, after paragraph 3 would mean in place paragraph 4, in place paragraph 5, and then 6, right? So that's where it'd be in place of, but just keep that in mind. So we're also told then that paragraph 3 is pretty much going to be where it is. All right. So we're going to go ahead and read that paragraph 2, just so we can keep that in mind as we go through it. So we have, viewing the exhibit, I was amazed by the intricate details of some of the more ornately decorated rooms. All right, so this is upon viewing the exhibit. So once we get to the exhibit, we're looking at it, we're amazed by the intricate details, we're marveling at a replica of a salon, and then we go on to talk about some details that are pretty specialized and fine details, right, about an exhibit. So just keep that in mind. And I just did a quick read there. You just want to kind of read it quick just to get the gist of it so you can know where to place it as you read through. And then you go back and start at the beginning. All right, the first time I visited the Art Institute of Chicago, I expected to be impressed by its famous large paintings. On one hand, I couldn't wait to view painter George Seurat's 10-foot wide A Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte in its full size. All right, well, let's see what we got here. So we've got our transition word, right? And we know it's a transition because it's at the beginning of a sentence, has a comma after it, right? Sets up perfectly for it to be a transition. Okay, so let's read our sentence before it and connect it to the sentence that it's leading into. The first time I visited the Art Institute of Chicago, I expected to be impressed by its famous large paintings. On one hand, I couldn't wait to view painter George Seurat's 10-foot wide, so a large painting, a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte in its full size. It took me by surprise then when my favorite exhibit at the museum was one of its tiniest. Okay, so let's look at our options here. We have for instance. So is she describing an instance? Well, yes, she is. Is she using a contrasting, such as however? No, she's not really using a contrasting. She's actually giving an example, right? She's giving an example of the large painting that she expected to be impressed by, right? So similarly, that's not really showing us our example. So now we're left with on one hand, for instance, on one hand. That would be if you're weighing two different things. She's not weighing two different choices or anything. She's just giving her example, like for instance, right? So that'll be B. All right, now we have, I couldn't wait to view painter George Seurat's 10-foot wide, and then it goes on to list the name of the painting. Well, here's what we see here. So we're going to have two parts of this question when I see this. When I see an apostrophe S, that's usually tested, right? There'll usually be two choices that deal with one with an apostrophe, one without it. So it's George Seurat's painting, right? His 10-foot wide painting, which means we have to have an apostrophe because it's possessive. It's his painting. So I can eliminate any of them without apostrophes, but they all have it. So I can't eliminate anything there. Now I'm looking at this comma. Do we need to have a comma after that? Well, let's think about this. If it just said Bob's, she couldn't wait to see Bob's painting. Would we put a comma after Bob before it goes to painting? We wouldn't, right? So we're not going to put one here either, because this 10-foot wide, a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte in its full size. This is all a noun phrase, right? So we don't need a comma there. So we can take out B, we can take out A. All right, now we're left with 2, right? Or I'm sorry. We have Bob's, we can take out C, and then we can take out A as well. And you'll see we can actually take out B too, but I just haven't explained that part yet. All right, so now we look at B, right? We have Painter, George Sorow. So now we're down to this comma here. So do we need a comma after Painter between George Sorow? Well, we don't, right? Because starting right here, right before Painter, at Painter, we start our whole noun phrase, right? Painter George Sorow's 10 foot wide a Sunday on afternoon at the island of La Grande Jetée. That's our whole noun phrase up to here, right? We don't put a comma in our noun phrase, right? So we take this comma out, right? So B is going to be out and D will be our answer. Another way to think about this is if you were just talking to someone and you were to say, Painter George Sorow's 10 foot wide a Sunday of afternoon, right? When you say that, you don't take a pause, right? And sometimes, and not always, don't believe me, don't take this as always, but with a comma, if you don't take a space like as you're saying it, that can help you if you're stuck, right? If it's a 50-50 toss-up and you don't know, but then you say it in your head, obviously, because you can't speak on the SAT, but if you say it in your head and you don't pause when you're saying it, then you can probably remove the comma. Now, that's not an absolute rule, but that's just something if you're caught 50-50, you don't know the grammar rule, that's what you can use to help you. All right. It took me by surprise then when my favorite exhibit at the museum was one of its tiniest, the Thorne miniature rooms. All right, so here, when I see this, I'm looking at my semicolon here, and I'm recognizing if I have a semicolon, I need an independent clause on both sides of it, right? So I'm looking here, and I see that the Thorne miniature rooms is not an independent clause, so I can go ahead and get rid of A. Now I'm looking at B. Well, B also has a semicolon, so I can get rid of that. Now I'm looking at C and D. Well, I know that if I were to say its tiniest, we have its and we have its. Well, our its with an apostrophe, that is it is, right? So let's read our sentence. It took me by surprise then when my favorite exhibit at the museum was one of its tiniest. Would that make sense if it was one of it is tiniest? No, right? We need our possessive, right? It has to be its possessive. So this will be our possessive its, right? So that's what we're going to need there. So we know that our its can't have an apostrophe, so that would get rid of A and D. Now we are left with C, and C works, and here's why. First off, it has the right its, right? Second of all, it doesn't have our semicolon because we would need an independent clause. It uses a colon to introduce our important idea, Thorne miniature rooms. So C will be our answer there. All right. Now we're at paragraph 2, which we have to decide where it goes, but we're going to go ahead and solve our questions within it before we figure out where it goes. So we just ended paragraph 1 with her being surprised that her favorite exhibit was the Thorne miniature rooms. Now we're viewing the exhibit, so that's a good sign, maybe that this is where it is, but we'll see. Viewing the exhibit, I was amazed by the intricate details of some of the more ornately decorated rooms. I marveled at a replica of a salon, a formal living room dating back to the reign of French King Louis XV. Built into the dark paneled walls are bookshelves stocked with leather-bound volumes. The couch and chairs, in keeping with the style of the time, are characterized by elegantly curved arms and legs. They are covered in luxurious velvet. Alright, so we're asked for 15, right here. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentences. Some scholars argue that the excesses of King Louis XV's reign contributed significantly to the conditions that resulted in the French Revolution. What are we discussing here? We don't actually care about French King Louis XV, right? Our discussion is about the furniture. We're giving details about the furniture throughout this whole paragraph. So we don't really care about the French Revolution and what his reign did, right? So should the writer make this addition here? No, because it's kind of irrelevant. Not kind of, it is irrelevant, right? So we have no, because we'll do D. No, it implies that the interior designer of the salon had political motivations. That's not why. We're just not including it because it has nothing to do with, not nothing to do, but it's a stretch and it's not needed and it interrupts our flow, right? So no, because it interrupts the paragraph's description of the miniature salon. All right, next up. Now we get down here. We have the couch and chairs in keeping with the style of the time, right? So this part right here, non-essential. So if we're looking for grammar, we can kind of skip over it. The couch and chairs are characterized by elegantly curved arms and legs. comma, they are covered in luxurious velvet. Alright, so let's look at our options. Well, let's think here. If we're going to have a comma here, but then we have they are covered in luxurious velvet. Well, they are covered in luxurious velvet is an independent clause. We can't have a comma to separate that without a fanboy, and we don't have a fanboy. So no change is out. No change is out. And then we look at our other options. We have B. Well, B, we're just replacing they with the couch and chairs are covered in luxurious velvet, and that's also an independent clause. Right? We have a subject and a verb, so that's out. So now we're between C and D. Well, let's think about it. If we were to use D, we would just have are covered in luxurious velvet. But I mean, why would we have a comma before that? That just doesn't make sense, right? And we can't just have are covered in luxurious velvet after a comma. So our answer is going to be C. And if we think about it, this makes sense, right? Because we have the couch and chairs are characterized by elegantly curved arms and legs and are covered in luxurious velvet, which works grammatically and it also flows well. It's efficient with the word choice. So C is going to be our answer. All right, now thinking back to this paragraph as a whole, we know that we're giving specific details about the furniture within our exhibit. So now we're going to go ahead and read paragraph 3 and see what it talks about, see if we should leave paragraph 2 where it is or move it. So we have this exhibit showcases 68 miniature rooms inserted into a wall at eye level. What's that describing, right? That's describing the exhibit that we introduced with our colon back in paragraph 1, right? Remember how we left off with its tiniest, the Thorn miniature rooms? Well, now, what do we start with? This exhibit, the Thorn miniature rooms that we described in paragraph 1. So when I see that, I know that my paragraph 2 here, it should actually come after paragraph 3, because we're giving specific details about this exhibit that she's actually describing. Consists of 3 walls. The 4th wall is a glass pane. She's describing the macro view of it in paragraph 3, but in paragraph 2 she's describing the micro view of specific pieces within it, right? And in here we see that she's just explaining it. We have the rooms and their furnishings were painstakingly created to a scale of 1/12 or actual size. So she's explaining that exhibit. We want to explain that exhibit before we go into specific details. So we know paragraph 2 is going to come after 3, so we can go ahead and answer that. So our answer is going to be B there. All right. Okay. So that 1 inch in the exhibit correlates with 1 foot in real life. A couch, for example, is 7 inches long. And then our question here is which choice gives a second supporting example that's most similar to the example already in the sentence. All right, we will want to come up with our own answer so we aren't swayed by the answer choices. Our first example is saying that a couch is 7 inches long, so we want a second example that's similar. We would want an object and then small size, right? So we want another object with a small size. So we have, and that is based on a 7-foot long couch. That doesn't give us our second supporting example. We have a teacup is about 1/4 of an inch. That does. We'll read our other answer choices and make sure there are even tiny cushions on some. That's not giving us our small size, right? Because we're given our 7 inches long. We want that size to follow that object. That doesn't hold the pattern in C. And we see that D also doesn't hold that pattern, with household items are also on the scale. So B holds the pattern. It's similar. Our answer is going to be B. Each room represents a distinctive style of European, American, or Asian interior design from the 13th to 20th centuries. Okay, the plainer rooms are more sparsely furnished. Their architectural features, furnishings, and decorations are just as true to the periods they represent. Okay, as I see this, when I see furnished in there, I see we have a period here. I'm automatically, as I read through, I'm looking to connect these sentences on my first read through. As soon as I get here, I see I'm about to finish my sentence, I see a period, and I see we continue into there. As I'm reading first time through, and I didn't do this with you guys just because I'm trying to go slow to teach you guys, as soon as I start reading the sentence and I see I have a period here, I'm looking to connect these, because when we have the end of a sentence underlined with a period and then the start of the beginning of the next, we can kind of assume, we'll always check, but we're going to assume that we're combining the sentences at the underlined portion. Right? Okay, so now I'm going to read through and I'm going to show you how I'd solve it on my own before looking at the answer choices. So we have the plainer rooms are more sparsely furnished. their architectural features, furnishings, and decorations are just as true to their periods they represent. Alright, so what I'm looking at here is when I see the plainer rooms are more sparsely furnished, I'm looking for a connection here, right? So they're saying they're more sparsely furnished, but then they're saying that their features, furnishings, and decorations are just as true. So we're going from something that's saying, maybe not so great because it's sparsely furnished or didn't take as much time, to saying that it's really good still because the furnishings that are there are still very true to the periods they represent. So I'm kind of contrasting what I say in my first part right here, our first independent clause, to our second, right? So we're looking for a contrasting connection. Well, C, I see that there's no connection at all, right? There's no transition word. I see D, whereas, comma, whereas. Well, I have two independent clauses, right? I have to connect that with a fanboy. Well, the only one here with a fanboy is going to be B, right? I have a comma and then but. So I know my answer here will be B. So we'll have the plainer rooms are more sparsely furnished, but their architectural features, furnishings, and decorations are just as true to the periods they represent. Alright, one of my favorite rooms in the whole exhibit, in fact, is an 1885 summer kitchen. The room is simple but spacious, with a small sink and counter along one wall, a cast iron wood stove and some hanging pots and pans against another wall, and a small table under a window of the third wall. Alright, well, what do I see here? There's a pattern, right? And if you guys didn't pick it up on your first read, that's okay. Just make sure you go back. But as I'm reading this, what did I pick up on? Well, I picked up on how we have a cast iron wood stove and some hanging pots. So we have objects and pans against another wall. So we have objects, wall. What about in the part before it? We have small sink and counter along one wall. So we have objects, wall, objects, wall. Right here, I'm looking for objects, wall to hold that pattern through. So we have a small table under a window of the third wall. So we have objects, wall. So we're asked which choice most closely matches the stylistic pattern established earlier in the sentence. Alright, well, I'm looking for objects, wall, which this does hold. So we'll go ahead and look at our other options, but right now I'm thinking our answer will be A. Alright, B. A small table is under the third wall's window. No, we don't want to end in window. We ended with wall on our other two. We want to end with wall again. C, the third wall. We're starting with wall. No, we want to end with wall. D, the third wall. Nope, we want to end with wall. Our answer is going to be A. Aside from a few simple wooden chairs placed near edges of the room, the floor is open and obviously well worn. Alright. As I walked through the exhibit, I overheard a visitor's remark. Well, as I read this, when I see visitors with an apostrophe after it, I know we're talking plural visitors, but the problem is we have a visitors. Well, the thing is, if we have I overheard a, then we know we have a singular visitor. So not multiple visitors, but one. So no change is out and B is out because it has visitors. So we are left with C and D, with the only difference being remarked versus remark. Well, did a visitor remarked? Does that sound right? No. It's a visitor remark. I overheard a visitor remark. If it was I overheard a visitor remarked, that doesn't work because you can't overhear a visitor remarking in the past tense, right? She overheard a visitor remark, so she overheard a visitor say something. It wouldn't work if she was to say, I overheard a visitor said something, right? Because that's what the difference is between remarked and remarked. Remarked would be if it was like said, and remark would just be if it was say, right? So I overheard a visitor say, and then something, right? Versus I overheard a visitor said something. Well, said is past tense. We don't want that. We need present tense, right? So our answer there is going to be B. Alright, you know that grandfather clock actually runs, its glass door swings open, and the clock can be wound up. Well, now we have dotted with pin-sized knobs followed by a comma. Well, when you have a phrase like this, a descriptive phrase, I'm sorry, I can't talk. When you have a descriptive phrase, right, followed by a comma, what that's telling me, that's telling me that it has to describe what follows it, right? So we have our descriptive phrase dotted with pin-sized knobs with a comma, followed by another visitor. Well, we know our other visitor isn't actually dotted with pin-sized knobs, right? That has to be describing something different, right? Like a box or a drawer, right? So now we're going to look at our options. Well, B, it says another visitor dotted with pin-sized knobs. Well, that's the same thing. We're saying this another visitor is dotted with pin-sized knobs, and that's not true. Next we have another visitor dotted with pin-sized knobs. That's also not true, right? Now we have D, another visitor noticed my fascination with a tiny writing desk and its drawers dotted with pin-sized knobs. Now we're saying our drawers, they are dotted with pin-sized knobs, which is accurate. So our answer there is going to be D. Alright, all of those little drawers pull out, and you see that hutch? Can you believe it has a secret compartment? Given the exquisite craftsmanship and level of detail I'd already seen, I certainly could, right? And then we already answered 22, so we can go ahead and move on. Alright, environmentalist otters. It has been long known that the sea otters living along the west coast of North America help keep kelp forests and their habitat healthy and vital. Alright, so we're looking at a long stretch here, seeing if it has to be changed. Alright, so looking at any changes that pop out to me, I see I have a comma here, not one here, comma here, right? We don't have a comma here. So do we need a comma there? We can use that to get rid of two of our answers. It has long been known that the sea otters living along the west coast of North America help keep, well, if we put a comma after North America, why would we do that, right? There's no reason to. It's just unnecessary. Because then we'd have, it has long been known that sea otters living along the west coast of North America, and then a comma, where they help keep kelp forests in their habitat healthy and vital. Well, here's the problem with that then. We don't have an independent clause, right? If we just have it has been long known that the sea otters living along the west coast of North America, that isn't an independent clause itself, right? So then we run into a problem where we have a non-independent clause here, right? And that's including everything that precedes it. And then we have another non-independent clause following it, right? So we would have no independent clause, and therefore we'd have no sentence. So we know we can't have a comma. So we get rid of D, get rid of B. Now we're between A and C. All right, well, looking at C, we have and help to versus help keep kelp, right? All right, so we'll go ahead and just read it, see what one sounds correct, and then we'll go from there and look at grammar. It has been long known that the sea otters living along the west coast of North America and help to keep. No, that's unnecessary. We don't need and help to keep. It's just help to keep, right? We don't want to be using excess words. We want to be efficient with our words. A is efficient with our words. All right. They do this by feeding on sea urchins and other herbivores, invertebrates that graze voraciously on kelp. With sea otters to keep the population of sea urchins in check, kelp forests can flourish. In fact, and now we're asked which choice offers an accurate interpretation of the data in the chart. So we're just going to go through our answers, see what one is accurate, right? So we have, in fact, 2 years or less of sea otters can completely eliminate sea urchins in a coastal area. Okay, so we're looking for 2 years or less, and we're looking at sea urchins. It's saying it can completely eliminate. Can it? No, we still have some there. A is out. What about B? Even 2 years or less of sea otter presence can reduce the sea urchin threat. Well, what do we see? Without otters, our sea urchin threat is here, right there. With otters for 2 years, it declines. B is accurate. It works grammatically. B is our answer. All right, 25. All right, down here. Without sea otters present, nevertheless, kelp forests run the danger of becoming barren stretches of coastal wasteland known as urchin barrens. All right, well, what do we know? We know that we need a word that relates without sea otters present to the kelp forests running the danger of becoming barren stretches, right? So we need a word that shows that relationship, right? Nevertheless doesn't really show us that relationship. What about however? Without sea otters present, however, kelp forests run the danger. Well, that does, right? That's showing how without our sea otters present, right? However, if we don't have sea otters, the kelp forests run the danger of becoming barren stretches of coastal wasteland, right? So that does show our relationship. All right, and then when I see this one here, that means I'm going to have a sentence where I'm going to have to place it within this paragraph. So I'm actually going to go ahead and find my question that correlates with the sentence. I'm going to read the sentence, and then as I read through my paragraph, I'm going to, in the back of my mind, be thinking of where I can place it. That way I don't have to go back and reread my whole paragraph when I get to that question. So I see that question 31. It's asking me, where is the most logical place in this paragraph to add the following sentence? So we have what Wilmers and Estes discovered in their study therefore surprised them. So our options are after sentence 1, after sentence 3, after sentence 4, or after sentence 5. Well, what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for a sentence that kind of talks about Wilmers and S and what they discovered, right? So the results are probably going to come after, and there's going to be a run-up where they talk about Wilmers and S and what kind of study they're doing. So I'm looking for a sentence preceding it with likely a study, and I'm looking for the facts and the results of that study to come after more than likely, because it's going to explain why it surprised them, right? So in the back of my mind, I'm keeping that. All right. What was less well known until recently, at least, was how this relationship among sea otters, sea urchins, and kelp forests might help fight global warming. So that's the main idea. The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased 40%. Now we're asked, should the writer add the following since the start of the Industrial Revolution? Well, that adds a time frame, so that's good. And then we have resulting in a rise in global temperatures. Well, this resulting here is giving us causation, right? Which is going to be good to know, right? If we have a relationship, it's good to tell the audience. So now, should the writer make this addition here? Well, I would say yes, because it's giving our audience our relationship and a timeline, which are both good things when discussing data. So I'm going to say yes, because it establishes the relationship between the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and global warming. And the other choice for yes is because it explains key role sea otters, sea urchins, and kelp forests play in combating global warming, but we're already told that in sentence 1, so we know that's not going to be our answer. Alright, and then if we look at the nose, just to be thorough here, it says because it contradicts the claim made in the previous paragraph that sea otters help keep kelp forests healthy. It doesn't contradict that. And then we have no because it mentions the Industrial Revolution, blurring the focus of the paragraph. And that's also not a good reason to not add it, because it doesn't blur the focus by mentioning that it was since the Industrial Revolution. We're not actually talking about the Industrial Revolution. We're just mentioning it as a time frame. All right. Now we have a recent study by 2 professors at the University of California, Santa Cruz, Chris Elmers and James Estes. So I'm keeping that in the back of my mind. Now we have our 2 characters that we have our sentence we have to place in. Suggests that kelp forests protected by sea otters can absorb as much as 12 times the amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as those where sea urchins are allowed to devour the kelp. All right, so looking at our question here, we have our professors at the University of California, Santa Cruz, Chris Wilmers and James Estes, suggests that kelp forests protected by sea otters. All right, well, if we have suggest that, we don't need a comma after suggests, right? Why would we have to have a comma before suggest that, or in the middle of it, right? We don't need that. We just have suggest that. So I know A is not going to be my answer, right? And I know, really, we're just going straight into it. Why would we have a comma and then a quote, right? If we were going to do that, we would have to have quotation marks at the end, which we do not. So we know we can't have a quote. And then we have suggest with a dash that. Well, we don't need suggest that, dash that, right? We're just suggesting that. We don't need anything to split it, right? That's just unnecessary. All right. Now we have can absorb as much as 12 times the amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as those where sea urchins are allowed to devour the kelp. Well, what do we have here? We have one word underlined. What does that mean? We're looking to replace the word or keep it, right? So does it make sense where it is? I would argue that it does. If we look at our other options, see, overindulge on, that's not efficient, right? It's just kind of a not necessary to use overindulge on. It's not like we're talking about dessert where you can overeat, right? And then we have dispose of. Well, they're not disposing of the kelp, they're eating them, right? That's a complete wrong word choice. And then we have dispatch the kelp. Well, look, we're not dispatching like police officers, right? That's a bad word choice. We're devouring the kelp, we are eating them, right? We're not sending them somewhere. All right. Now we have, like their terrestrial plant cousins, kelp, right? So this here is describing kelp, which is all good. Now we're asked for their, right? So this, when you see their or its, you're probably going to be asked whether it's their or its, and the 2 types of theirs and the 2 types of its. Right, so now we're going to go ahead and look at our options. Well, we have kelp. What is kelp? Kelp is singular. Like their terrestrial plant cousin. Well, who is terrestrial plant cousins? Kelps, right? Well, let's think of it. If we had kelp here, it'd be kelps. It's their terrestrial plant cousin. So we need a singular possessive. Well, what does singular mean? It means there is out, because there would be plural. And this one's they are, so that one you can get rid of just by knowing it right there. So we're left with it and its. Well, this D would be it is. That's not possessive, right? C is our singular and possessive one. So C is going to be our answer. Scientists knew this but did not recognize how large a role they played in helping kelp forests to significantly decrease the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Alright, well, what do we know? We know that we are asked how large a role it played, so we have an it versus they. And then we have how large a role sea otters played, which I prefer because it's specific, and we're not told what they is. There is no animal or anything that says what they is, right? So off the bat, honestly, I was kind of confused when I read large role they play because I didn't know who they was or who it is, right? So A and B I don't like. I like sea otters much more. It's specifics, and we actually know what role is being played by who. It's being played by the sea otters, right? And then D, we have they as well. So I'm going to go with C because that's the only one that actually gives us our subject, right? Alright, now we move on. Well, what did we just have in 5, right? We have that scientists knew something. They didn't recognize how important something was. So that's kind of a surprise, right? And what did I say back when I was looking at 31? I said I'm looking for something that introduces our Wilmer and S followed by results, right? So I'm going to keep that in my mind as I go through here. So now I have far from making no difference. So far from making no difference. What does that sound like? That sounds like a surprise. To the ecosystem, the presence of otters was found to increase the carbon storage of kelp forests by 4.4 to 8.7 megatons annually, offsetting the amount of carbon dioxide emitted by 3 million to 6 million passenger cars each year. Well, what is that number? Sounds pretty surprising, right? We have megatons, which is probably a lot of tons, right? It's a megaton. Then we have 3 million to 6 million passenger cars each year. That's a lot of passenger cars, right? So we have our introduction to what they discovered in the study, right? We had background information about how they knew something but didn't recognize how significant it was. And then we have them explaining that what they discovered surprised them and then explaining their results, right? So what I'm going to say is I'm going to go ahead and say after sentence 5, right? Because we want it to precede our results but come after an introduction of that study. So that it's linking the study to the results. Alright. Wilmers and S caution, however, that having more otters will not automatically solve the problem of higher levels of carbon dioxide in the air. Well, when we read having more otters, that sounds very informal, right? And we're looking at a formal piece, right? This is a scientific essay about otter population and its relationship to global warming. So saying having more otters, that's kind of informal, right? So if we look at our answer choices, we have that the otters multiplying, which doesn't make sense, and then D, having more otters than other locations. Well, we're not talking about other locations, so that's out. So we're left with increasing the otter population versus having more otters. Well, increasing the otter population is much more formal and fits in the context of a scientific essay like this. So now we read on, we read, but they suggest that the presence of otters provides a good model of how carbon can be sequestered or removed from the atmosphere through the management of animal populations. All right. Well, when we see sequestered or removed from the atmosphere, when I see sequestered, comma, or removed, I see that that has to be a comma as well. Because by saying or removed, what we're doing here is we're just kind of giving a brief definition of sequestered in case you didn't know what it meant. So in that case, we're going to have comma there and comma there. So we can go ahead and get rid of no change because it uses a semicolon. And we see we have commas after from in B and C, which is unnecessary, right? Because we don't want to have a comma after from, splitting from and the, because we would then read from and then have to pause and then say the atmosphere, which doesn't make sense. We don't need a comma there. That'd be unnecessary. So we can get rid of no change, get rid of B, get rid of C, and we're left with D. A quick fix and a throwaway culture. Planned obsolescence, a practice at which products are designed to have a limited period of usefulness. Well, as I read this, when I read a practice at which products are designed, I know that that doesn't sound right? As I read this, honestly, what pops into my head is a practice by which products are designed, right? But that isn't an answer choice. I have at which and from which neither of them are things that make sense, right? It's not going to be from which products are designed, right? They're not designed from a practice, right? It's a practice whereby products are designed, right? It's not a practice so that products are designed. The practice is what is causing the products to be designed that way, right? It's not a practice so that they're designed that way. It's a practice whereby, right? It's in the production of it. Or I'm sorry, I circled so that on accident. I meant to X that out, right? It's a practice whereby products are designed, right? The products are designed in this practice. It's not so, the practice isn't so that products are designed. The practice is whereby the products are designed, right? So our answer is going to be D. Have a limited period of usefulness. And now we see we have usefulness in all our answer choices. So our question here is going to be our punctuation for our grammar, right? All right, well, we have planned obsolescence, and then a definition of it, a practice at which products are designed to have a limited period of usefulness. And we see we have a comma here and here, right? Which means we have to have this comma here to match with our comma there, so that we have planned obsolescence has been a cornerstone of manufacturing strategy for the past 80 years. Right, so we have to match our punctuation up here with our punctuation here. So it's going to be a comma and a comma. So we know our answer choice here is going to be A. All right, this approach increases sales, but it also stands in austere contrast to a time when goods were produced to be durable. All right, austere contrast. Well, when I think contrast, and I think words that precede it, just the most common one, and one that comes to mind, is stark, right? Stark contrast. So we have this approach increases sales, but it also stands in stark contrast, right? Stark meaning basically like clear contrast, like these two things completely contrast each other. It's very clear, it's obvious to the eye, right? Whereas austere, most people honestly aren't even going to know what that means. And if you're on the SAT writing section, you don't know what a word means, but you do know another one, and you know another one would work there, pick the one that you know, right? Don't let your confidence just say, oh, I'm not confident, I wasn't ready, I didn't know this word. Stay confident. Confidence is really important when you're taking the SAT. So when I read this, I know stark contrast, right? I know that this approach increases sales, but it is in stark contrast to a time when goods were produced to be durable. So not only do I know my definition, and I know it works here when I read the sentence. So I can pick stark even if I don't know what austere means or egregious means. And I do know what egregious and austere mean. I just wanted to show you an example because I know, there are going to be questions where you don't know what a word means, and you have to be able to deal with that and find the right answer. So, all right, planned obsolescence wastes materials as well as energy in making and shipping new products. It also reinforces the belief that it is easier to replace goods than to mend them, as repair shops are rare and repair methods are often specialized. Okay, this is at the end of my sentence. I know it's not going to be a connecting sentence because then in 2009 it'll be underlined. So I'm just kind of looking for grammar and if there's efficiency in writing, not repetitive, not redundant, right? All right. So as repair shops are rare and repair methods are often specialized, right? It makes it hard to replace goods. Okay, so off the bat, I'm going to put a check mark by no change because everything works grammatically and it makes sense, flows logically with the passage. So I'm going to read my other options. Obsolete goods can become collectible items. Well, that doesn't fit with our sentence because our sentence is talking about how it also reinforces the belief that it's easier to replace goods than to mend them. And we're explaining why it's easier. People think it's easier to replace goods than mend them. This has nothing to do with it. We're not talking about collectibles. Now, how about no one knows whether something will fall into disrepair again? Well, that's not explaining why people are believing it's easier to replace them than to fix them, right? Because even though people may not know when something will fall into disrepair again, that isn't what's causing them to think it's easier to replace goods than to fix them, right? What's causing them to think it's easier to replace goods than fix them is the fact that repair shops are rare and repair methods are very specialized, so the average person can't really do them, or they think they can't, right? And then new designs often have bugs that must be worked out. I mean, seeing often have bugs, that's just kind of informal to me, honestly, and I wouldn't rule it out just because of that. But then when you put it in context with repair shops are rare and new designs often have bugs that must be worked out, we're not really talking about new designs, we're talking about repairing things. So that doesn't fit. So our answer is going to be A. Alright. When I see that I have a 1 at the beginning of my sentence, I know that I'm probably going to be asked about where a sentence needs to be. So I'm actually going to go and find the question that's asking that. That way at the end I don't have to go back and read through all my sentences. So I see that I'm asked about sentence 5, and I'm asked to make this paragraph most logical. Where should it be placed? So I'm going to go read it. So I have, since the inaugural cafe, others have been hosted in theater foyers, community centers, hotels, and auditoriums. So I'm just going to keep that sentence in the back of my mind and try and fit it in as I read through, right? Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to take a look, right? So we have more like a fair than an actual cafe. Well, what do I know here? I know this is the wrong than, right? So when we're comparing things, we're going to use than with an A. So any of them with an E can be removed. So I can eliminate A and D. And now I have two types of fare. Well, this type of fare is like a payment for a bus, right? Your bus fare, or your fare that you pay to take your car on a ferry to go from one state across the lake to another, right? So that type of fare is a payment. We're talking about a fare like in comparison to a cafe, so like your county fair, right? So like, let's do this, just draw like a little fair tent, right? That kind of fare. So our answer there is going to be B. The first repair cafe took place in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. It was the brainchild of former journalist Martien Postma, and then we have wanting. But what do I see here? When I see it was the brainchild of former journalist Martien Postma, and then I see wanting to take a practical stand, I know this is really going to be who wanted to take a practical stand. And here's why. I know that this, after this, is a non-essential phrase, right? So I'm just going to write NE. And here's why. We know that we're describing Martien Postma, right? But we have our independent clause right there, right? It was the brainchild of former journalist Martien Postma, who wanted to take a practical stand in throwaway culture. So when I see a comma and then a word following it, I'm actually looking for something like who wanted or which was in 1932 or something like that, that's giving a non-essential part of my whole sentence here. And I'm looking to do that, right? So I see wanting, and I think that it's going to be who wanted, which will be C. All right. Now we have her goals were straightforward, however. Well, why do we need however there, right? That's kind of unnecessary. Her goals were straightforward. We're not comparing anything, so we don't need however. So anything with however, I'm actually going to go ahead and remove. So that'll be A. Now what about her goals were straightforward, therefore? Why do we need therefore? Her goals are straightforward. We don't need something else, right? We want to be efficient. We don't want to just put a word in just to put it in. So now we look for our grammar now, right? So we have comma, comma, we have colon. Well, her goals were straightforward. Now if we already use a colon, we have a list of 3, right? Reduce waste, maintain and perpetuate knowledge and skills, and strengthen the community. That's perfect. We're using a colon to introduce our list, and we're going straight into our list, right? And we're using efficient word choice. That's perfect, right? Our answer is going to be D. Now we have to still place our 5th sentence. What do we know about our 5th sentence at this point, right? Well, we know it's talking about since the inaugural repair cafe, and we know sentence 3 is the founder explaining their goals. And we see in sentence 4, we have participants bringing all manners of damaged articles, so it sounds like we have advanced from our first one, right? We've grown in size, and we give specific things that come to be repaired by a full staff of volunteer specialists, right? So it sounds like they've grown a lot. So it doesn't sound like this is back in our first one, right? So it sounds like they've expanded. They now have tailors, electricians, and carpenters. Well, if they've expanded, we would think that we would, before our sentence talking about the expansion, now them having all of these volunteers, we would think we'd have since the inaugural cafe, others have been hosted in theater, foyers, community centers, hotels, and auditoriums, because all these places are going to be needed to house all these people, all these volunteers, right, and to host these events. So we actually know that our sentence 5 then has to come after 3 but before 4. So let's go ahead and look at 42 and see if that's a choice, and it is. So our answer is going to be C. Now we have, while they await for service, patrons can enjoy coffee and snacks and mingle with their neighbors in need. Well, I see we have while they await. So I know that we're kind of looking for a verb here, right? So we're looking for a verb there. Well, I see we have mingle. Mingle is present tense, right? They can mingle. So we have mingle, present tense. Well, what else is present tense? They await. Well, just thinking while they await for service, that's long, It's not grammatically correct. We can get rid of that. How about while awaiting for service? While awaiting for service does not work. While they waited for service, well, that doesn't work with our present tense mingle here. How about while waiting for service? Well, that's present tense. They're waiting for service. So while waiting for service, patrons can enjoy coffee and snacks and mingle with their neighbors and eat. It fits our tenses, it's grammatically correct, and it flows logically. We're not using words repeated. We're not using redundant words. We're using efficient words, right? So our answer there is going to be D. All right, so we got 2 questions left. Though only about 3% of the Netherlands municipal waste ends up in landfills, repair cafes still raise awareness about what may otherwise be mindless acts of waste by providing a venue for people to share and learn valuable skills that are in danger of being lost. So we're asked, should we add the following sentence? As the number of corporate and service-based jobs has increased, the need for people who work with their hands has diminished. Now, when we read this, what do we recognize with it? We recognize that this is not related, right? It's vaguely related. I won't say it's not related, but I'll say it's vague, right? Very vaguely related. All right, let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, it's vaguely related, right? So would I make this addition? I wouldn't, because we're talking about now economics and which jobs are in demand and which ones aren't, but that wasn't the point of all this. The point of this whole essay, or this whole piece, was about how it's important to have repair cafes because they help repair things and reduce waste, right? This doesn't really have anything to do with people working with their hands. So should they make the addition? We can get rid of our yeses. So we should have no, because it blurs the paragraph's focus by introducing a topic that's not further explained, right? It doesn't contradict claims made in the rest of the paragraph, so we can get rid of D. All right. Then we have, it is easy to classify old but fixable items as junk in an era that places great emphasis on the next big thing. In helping people consider how the goods they use on a daily basis work and are made, repair cafes restore a sense of relationship between human beings and material goods. Though the concept remained a local trend at first, international repair cafes, all affiliated with the Dutch Repair Cafe via its website, have since arisen in France, Germany, South Africa, the United States, and other countries on top of that. What do we know? That's redundant. We're repetitive. What do we not want to be? Redundant and repetitive, right? So we have to change this. There's no change. That's not an option, guys. We want to eliminate redundancy and repetition. So what do we have? We have France, Germany, South Africa, United States, and other countries. We don't need on top of that. We're told other countries, right? So we're just going to delete the underlined portion and end the sentence with a period. We need that period to be grammatically correct, right? It's not going to be likewise. It's not going to be in addition because we have other countries and that's enough. So our answer there is going to be D.